Education and Economic Development Subcommittee of Appropriations, bringing this hearing to order. We'll be focusing on MSDE's Early Childhood Development Agency. But before that, I just want to acknowledge that beyond my capable and awesome colleagues on the subcommittee, we're also joined by Vice Chair Jane. So thank you for being with us today. And the first testimony will come from our budget analyst, Ann Wagner.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, members of the committee. As you said, today I'm presenting the budget analysis for the early childhood development programs under the Maryland State Department of Education. So I'm going to jump right in and skip to page 5 to get into performance analysis. This exhibit shows the results on the kindergarten readiness assessment. This is an assessment that measures incoming kindergartners' school readiness level, with demonstrating readiness being the highest level you can achieve. In the 21 to 22 school year, the statewide proportion of students demonstrating readiness fell to just under 40%. That is a 5 percentage point decrease compared to pre-pandemic levels. Certain subgroups of students, including children with disabilities, English learners, and low-income direct certified children, have also persistently reported lower proportions of students demonstrating readiness compared to the statewide results. And so each of these groups also saw decreases in the proportion demonstrating readiness compared to pre-pandemic levels as well. So we highlight the KRA results here as the Accountability and Implementation Board, or AIB, has identified this as one of the performance measures it will monitor for the early childhood expansion efforts under the Blueprint for Maryland's Future. And so I'll skip ahead again to the budget discussion. So on page 8, this begins the discussion of fiscal 22 actions. As part of the American Rescue Plan Act, Maryland received $309 million to help stabilize the child care industry while providers were dealing with the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic. MSDE distributed $286 million of those federal funds to child care providers through 2 rounds of stabilization grants in fiscal 22. And so the first round was distributed between September and December of 2021, and then the second round was distributed from January to March of 2022. MSDE noted in response to last year's Joint Chairman's report that it streamlined the grant application, it provided more customer service to applicants, and then it reviewed applications on a rolling basis to improve processing times in that second round after hearing from providers and hearing how to improve from how the first round went. And so in addition to the American Rescue Plan federal funds, there was also $50 million in general funds allocated in fiscal 22, and then $3.2 million in general funds allocated in fiscal 23. These were all allocated to award more stabilization grants. MSDE retained the $50 million to spend in fiscal 23 and administered a third round of grants in the fall of 2022. Legislation from last year and language in the fiscal 23 budget bill specified that those state-funded stabilization grants should give preference to certain child care providers meeting the criteria and characteristics that are listed on page 8 of the analysis. And those characteristics are listed in order of priority. As of February 1st, there had not been an application posted for the remaining $3.2 million in general funds that were budgeted in fiscal 23. And so MSD is asked to provide an update on the state-funded stabilization grants that have been awarded in fiscal 23, including the timing of when the $3.2 million will be awarded. DLS recommends that the committees adopt narrative requesting a report on all stabilization grant allocations with descriptions for how the child care providers spent the grants. And also note that a similar report was requested in last year's Joint Chairman's report, and as of the writing of this analysis, that report had not been submitted, but MSD has since provided that response. And so on the next page, the analysis talks about some of new programs and financial assistance established in legislation from last year to support child care providers. So this includes $16 million for one-time bonuses in fiscal 23 for child care providers and employees to improve recruitment and retention. Second, the legislation established a therapeutic child care grant program, and that's for providers of specialized child care and early education to children with certain developmental delays or physical disabilities. And so that program is budgeted at $3.7 million in each year for fiscal 23 and 24. Then a bill created the Child Care Capital Support Revolving Loan Fund to offer no interest loans for certain providers' capital expenses. So there's $15 million budgeted for the fund in fiscal 23 and $10 million budgeted in fiscal 24. And this program is budgeted and administered under the Department of Commerce, but we wanted to highlight it here as additional support for child care providers. So then the next exhibit on page 11 provides an overview of the fiscal 24 allowance for early childhood development programs, and the allowance totals $442 million. Between the Child Care Scholarship Program, which provides financial assistance with child care tuition costs, and then publicly funded pre-K, about $300 million, or 68% of this budget, pays for children and families with low incomes to access early childhood programs. So then moving on to Exhibit 4 on pages 12 and 13, this outlines changes in the allowance compared to the fiscal 23 working appropriation. Across MSDE's Division of Early Childhood and Early Childhood Programs, the allowance shows a net $113 million decrease. The largest driver of this decrease in compared to fiscal 23 is the American Rescue Plan federal funds that are budgeted for a supplemental child care development block grant award. Those funds are awarded or funded in fiscal 23, but you are not seeing those funds budgeted yet in fiscal 24, and so I'll discuss that more later. And then in the issues section. And on page 2, we highlight that support materials included with the allowance reflected $11.2 million in what appeared to be a new grant under the Division of Early Childhood. The department is asked to explain how those funds will be spent. So then moving on to personnel, the allowance converts 16 contractual positions into new regular positions, and those are mostly for licensing specialists. Looking at the Division of Early Childhood's vacancies as of December 31st, 2022, there were 15 vacant positions, or a vacancy rate of about 9.5%. This is a significant increase compared to the 3.6% vacancy rate reported in December of 2021. So, and this growth in vacancies is occurring as the division's workload is increasing with pre-kindergarten and child care scholarship expansion efforts. And so MSD is asked to discuss the factors leading to this rapid increase in Division of Early Childhood vacancies and the efforts it's now taking to improve recruitment and retention. So moving on to the issues section of this analysis that starts on page 16. The first issue outlines early childhood expansion efforts and mandates that are included in the blueprint. Exhibit 5 on page 17 shows the funding across these initiatives. The allowance meets mandated funding levels for each component, and those details are outlined further in Appendix 4. The largest component of the early childhood blueprint initiatives is the full-day pre-K formula, which is distributed through the Maryland State Pre-Kindergarten Grant Program. And that formula is meant to fund full-day pre-kindergarten slots in both public and private programs. Other provisions include level funding pre-kindergarten expansion grants. That program also supports full-day pre-K slots for low-income families, and that program will eventually consolidate with the formula funding beginning in fiscal 26. The allowance also includes funding for more wraparound services by allocating funds for new Judy centers and Patty centers, which both provide educational and health-related services to young children and their families. Exhibit 6 shows, on page 19, shows publicly funded pre-K expenses leading up to fiscal 23 when the formula was first implemented. The formula is jointly funded by state and local governments and is based on a per pupil amount that will phase in from fiscal 23 through 2030. In the first few years of implementation, the formula funds full-day pre-K slots for children with family incomes at or below 300% of the federal poverty level. Beginning in fiscal 25, children with family incomes between 300% and 600% of the federal poverty level will be able to receive a partially funded pre-K slot, with the family paying a share of the cost, and that would be based on a sliding scale developed by MSDE. In fiscal 23, local school systems ran into an implementation issue because they could not identify which children had family incomes at 300% federal poverty level or below. And so as a result, MSD provided the state share of pre-K formula costs for all children enrolled in public pre-K programs, regardless of their income. This led to the formula being funded at about $144 million, as it included a discretionary enhancement to serve more children than was required in statute. In fiscal 24, you're seeing the income determination issue is being resolved, and the formula returns to the calculation established in statute. So that leads to the $44 million decrease in the formula. And so with that, I'll move on to issue 2 that has to do with the Child Care Scholarship Program. Exhibit 7 shows recent enrollment trends, showing that there had been a sharp decline in children participating from May 2020 to December 21, while the COVID-19 pandemic limited the number of open child care programs and demand for child care services was reduced. Since around January 22, however, enrollment has climbed back up and just recently passed the pre-pandemic high enrollment level with almost 21,000 children participating in October 22. On page 22, overall, this outlines some of the changes in the program that have happened as that enrollment increased. So these are program changes that took effect May 23rd of 2022. This included increasing provider reimbursement rates to the 70th percentile of market rates, raising income eligibility levels to 75% of the state median income, and waiving or reducing co-payments assigned to participating families. At the bottom of page 22, we also highlight a few other additional changes that MSD has made to the program, specifically to streamline application processing and improve customer service. And so legislation from last year, specifically chapters 525 and 526, required some of these changes, like MSDE establishing presumptive eligibility so that families attesting their eligibility can receive scholarships while their application's being processed. This bill also set certain requirements for payment processing by MSDE and the comptroller. And then MSD also indicated in an October 2022 memo that it would transition child care scholarship reimbursement from a retroactive payment system based on attendance to an advanced payment system based on enrollment. And so considering these efforts, DLS is recommending that the committees adopt narrative requesting that MSD set annual goals and performance measures related to customer service and application processing as part of its annual Managing for Results submission. And so despite most of these child care scholarship program changes happening or continuing through fiscal 24, the budget for scholarships actually decreases. And so Exhibit 8 on page 24 shows the recent program budgets for child care scholarships. I will highlight that the general fund amount is increasing in the fiscal 24 allowance by $10 million, but overall total funds are declining. And that's because of in fiscal 23, you're seeing about $64 million budgeted in American Rescue Plan funds, and then in the fiscal 24 allowance, those federal funds have not been budgeted yet. And so these are funds that Maryland received. Maryland's total allocation from the American Rescue Plan for the Supplemental Child Care and Development Block Grant Award was about $200 million. That can be used flexibly to strengthen the early childhood system and make child care more affordable and accessible. MSDE planned to spend some of this funding on the child care scholarship program changes described earlier, like expanding income eligibility and increasing reimbursement rates. But in addition to that, the agency planned to distribute grants under a new Maryland Rebuilds program and support a major IT project that will modernize the legacy child care administration tracking system. On page 25, the analysis outlines cost estimates provided by Towson's Regional Economic Studies Institute, which serves as MSDE's child care scholarship data analysis vendor. And so the child care scholarship program changes, as I said, increasing income eligibility, increasing reimbursement rates, and then waiving or reducing copays. These are estimated to cost $56 million in fiscal 23, and then $67 million each year in fiscal 24 and 25. Based on these costs, projected fiscal 24 spending on scholarships would be just under $230 million, but the allowance only provides $174 million in total costs, or total expenses. State funds would be needed eventually to cover those added costs, and the fiscal 24 allowance, as I said, includes $10 million in additional general funds to cover a small portion of these added costs. However, based on the current budget plan, there is about $96 million in federal American Rescue Plan Act funds that have not been allocated yet and could cover the additional program costs in fiscal 24. And so considering this unappropriated federal fund support, DLS is recommending a reduction of the $10 million in additional general funds with language authorizing a budget amendment to bring in an equivalent amount of the rescue plan federal funds. After those one-time federal funds are fully expended, there would be a potentially significant state fund need moving forward, and the analysis notes concern for the child care scholarship program's ongoing sustainability beyond fiscal 24. MSD is asked to provide an update on the supplemental child care development block grant spending under the provided through the American Rescue Plan Act. It's asked to provide RESI's latest fiscal 23 and 24 cost estimates and its plan for sustaining the recent child care scholarship program expansion after the one-time federal funds are expended. DLS also recommends adopting narrative requesting quarterly enrollment and expenditure reports for the child care scholarship program. And so the recommended actions begin on page 27, and I think I've outlined all of them. So with that, I'll conclude the presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much for that presentation. It was very speedy and very thorough. We appreciate your efforts. Delegate Grace, do you have a question?
$28 million for the Judy Centers. Is that for all the Judy Centers, or is that for the ones that actually provide Head Start?
$28 million, that would be for all of the existing, and then the additional funds for new centers starting in fiscal 24.
Okay, so it's for the wraparound services, not specifically for Head Start.
No, each center, the grants are about $330,000 a center, and it's for, I think, anything that the center provides.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Vice Chair Solomon.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for the report. I have one quick question, and then maybe one that's going to take a little bit longer to answer. On the change in the $55 million for the policy changes to the $67 million, is that because as we bring on more kids with that income eligibility increase, the overall cost will expand, but in the first year, we're not necessarily going to get all those kids? It's going to take a little while to get the families that are now newly eligible with the increase in income eligibility?
Yes, I think that drives some of that increase.
Okay.
I know those estimates did take into account expected increases in enrollment, and so yes, it would take time for that to kind of fully set in.
Do you know if those numbers include the eligibility changes that we passed in the HB 995, the change for child support enforcement, and the changes with potentially presumptive eligibility going into effect?
I believe those estimates did not include those, and we note that the actual cost could be higher because of taking into account all those other changes, such as streamlining the application and right, the presumptive eligibility piece, all those kind of customer service application pieces. I don't believe were considered with those estimates.
That's what I thought. Thank you. Thanks for clarifying. And then, sort of more broadly, I think we've heard a lot on this committee, and I think more broadly about some of the issues with the pre-K implementation in the blueprint. Can you go a little bit more in depth on the identification issue with the income eligibility that caused the fluctuation in formulas and exactly how that was fixed? I think it'd be really helpful for us.
I don't want to give you an incorrect answer, so I might actually allow MSDE to, if that's okay.
We can talk more offline, certainly, yeah.
Yeah, and I think MSC can probably get into more of the details of how it or what shifted this year. I know that in fiscal 23, the issue was they weren't prepared, or like the local education agencies weren't able to determine specifically the 300% federal poverty level. They had a lower like free and reduced price meals level, which I think is 185%, so they could determine that group, but they couldn't get specifically the 300% for the use of this formula as it was written in statute. But I'll allow MSCE to maybe expand on that if possible, on how that changed in fiscal 24. Perfect.
And we know that the new state superintendent has had to implement a very robust law that he wasn't necessarily involved in writing. So appreciate that. Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you so much for your time, Ms. Wagner. We'll be greeted next by Superintendent Chaudhry, and please bring your team with you as well. We know you have another appointment across the street with those other people, but in the interest of time, feel free to focus on the points of disagreement with the recommendations. Perhaps that would be the best use of your time.
All right. Thank you very much. I think I'm good on time, but I appreciate it. Good afternoon, Chair Smith and members of the subcommittee. With me today is Justin Dayhoff. He is our Assistant State Superintendent. AKA my CFO of the department. Thank you, Ms. Wagner, for your thoughtful analysis, and my thanks to all of you for your continued commitment to early childhood education. I'm honored to be here today in service to our pre-K and childcare communities that have faced challenges throughout the pandemic and who yet remain the backbone for Maryland's recovery. This community has been an early focus of my administration, and I look forward to discussing our early childhood budget and then the work that those important resources support, as well as the major policy shifts we implemented this year to better serve the childcare community and improve the childcare scholarship program. To that end, I will respond to the analysis. With Blueprint implementation in progress amidst billions in one-time COVID aid programs, I want to start by responding to the analysis notes on staffing and vacancies. MSD concurs the department experienced an increase in vacancies between last December and this December in the Division of Early Childhood. Those vacancies do not come as a surprise, as a state hiring freeze, persistently low salaries, and the provision of contractual rather than permanent positions generated an increase in MSDE vacancies. Those vacancies are felt harder at MSD given the year-over-year reductions in MSDE permanent positions overall in the decade leading to the start of my term last year, with new and increasing requirements and obligations like the Blueprint for Maryland's Future. That being said, MSD took action and continues to emphasize recruitment and retention. This year's department budget proposal reflects these efforts. Efforts specific to the Division of Early Childhood include the conversion of 15 contractual positions to permanent positions in fiscal year 24. In addition, we identified licensing specialists as a particular source of higher than average turnover. Licensing specialists in the Division of Early Childhood are responsible for inspecting, credentialing, and providing assistance to childcare providers to ensure safe childcare. These positions currently have a ratio as low as 56:1 and as high as 78:1 providers per specialist. A comprehensive comparative analysis of the childcare licensing positions indicates that low compensation as well as restrictive and outdated minimum qualifications are the biggest issues impacting the hiring and retention of childcare licensing specialists. I proposed a 2-grade pay increase, about 12%, to employees in the licensing job series, which increases the starting salary for trainees to $60,000 starting in July 1, 2023. This proposal has been approved by DBM and is included in MSD's fiscal year 2024 budget allowance. It has taken time and effort to implement our new HR structure and to begin to see the structure operate in a way and with the rigor and consistency intended. For example, MSD's most recent recruitment that concluded last week resulted in 246 qualified candidates scheduled to be interviewed for 18 licensing specialist vacancies during the last week of February. The interviews will take place in 5 regions around the state over multiple days with multiple interview panels interviewing candidates. I fully expect to close out this vacancy by the middle of March. I've made clear to my team that while hiring challenges are not unique to MSDE, personnel challenges are not a reason for falling short of expectations or failing to get the work done. One example of that is our work in the Child Care Scholarship Program. For context, and for many members of the committee who may not be yet aware, the Child Care Scholarship Program ensures Maryland's children and families can access affordable child care and, if eligible based on income, receive direct financial support to do so. The MSD Division of Early Childhood supports over 7,000 child care providers in Maryland. Over 2,500 of these service providers participate in the Child Care Scholarship Program, which supports over 12,000 families and over 20,000 children, which is an increase over pre-pandemic levels. Shortly after I began my term, I became acutely aware of the struggles our childcare community was and is still facing. Struggles my administration inherited, but ones I resolved to address head-on. My first priority was pandemic recovery, improving implementation of the federal stabilization grants and other relief efforts to make sure that our providers could sustain childcare services and continue forward amidst the uncertainties and challenges of the pandemic. Throughout that effort, I also became increasingly aware of the historical challenges I inherited associated with administering the Child Care Scholarship Program. The challenges range from facing multiple attendance verification audits throughout the year to delayed payments. Further slow processing of Child Care Scholarship Program application affects the Maryland State Department of Education's ability to provide timely reimbursement for the children that providers are serving each day. Receiving payment 15 days after the start of a service period at best can put providers who often work payment to payment in a precarious situation at a time when we are trying to recover from the global pandemic and get Maryland back to work while ensuring that our children have the best possible care. For those reasons, this summer, MSD used the emergency allowances of the federal child care development funds to implement some stopgap measures for the child care scholarship program. First, we switched to an enrollment base rather than attendance-based scholarship payment. The switch allowed MSDE to pay providers the full amount of their scholarship enrollment each 2 weeks, regardless of whether or not children were in attendance. This matters because without this policy, providers do not and have not until this year been paid for a student when the child is absent. That presents a challenge because providers do not know when a child will be out sick or miss a day, and providers cannot release a slot for one day. Ultimately, the state has asked the child care scholarship participating providers to absorb the costs. Paying based on enrollment addresses this issue. Second, we issued one-time additional payments in August to help offset delays of scholarship processing and ongoing pandemic-related recovery. Third, we issued a special one-time child care scholarship program retention payment. Those actions were Band-Aids and not intended to eliminate ongoing challenges. I will highlight briefly system-wide permanent policy changes MSD made to address these concerns, and I have included in our written testimony the full policy memorandum we released to the provider community with more detailed information, including how the changes work. MSD's policy changes include both the use of advance payment, which is an MSDE identified and first in the nation policy, and a pilot program for presumptive eligibility that gives the department a head start in meeting the July 1st, 2023 requirement to implement presumptive eligibility statewide per last year's legislation. To be clear, advance payment and presumptive eligibility both involve increasing payment speed to providers based on the children they serve. But these are different policies. Understanding the difference between the two will be important for providers and the community, and I want to also make the clear distinction here as well. Advance payment refers to paying providers at the start of each month and midway through each month before they have served the children they enroll, rather than paying retroactively after a service period. Presumptive eligibility refers to assuming immediately upon receipt of a brief form that a family is eligible for the child care scholarship program and issuing a receipted voucher. First, advance payments. Prior to MSD's new policies, MSD paid providers retroactively based on student attendance. MSD issued payment to providers based on actual student attendance after the time in which the provider served the children. For example, if a student attends each day during a service period from March 1st and March 14th, MSD would begin to process the payment for that provider who enrolls the student with the receipted scholarship voucher on March 15th. The MSD payment process also added additional time. Once provider invoice was received and processed, which can take 5 days, MSD began the payment batch process in its accounting systems. 2 to 4 days later, MSD would send the payment to the General Accounting Division of the Comptroller to remit payment. As such, providers often receive payment more than 2 weeks after they had already paid for and served the children who they enroll. Income margins are small for our providers, and paying retroactively makes every dollar and every day count more. Now MSD pays providers in advance, not retroactively, and MSD issues the advance payments based on enrollment, where enrollment is defined as the number of students with active child care scholarship program vouchers assigned to a given provider at the end of the previous calendar month. Although many states across the country made this change during the pandemic, only a few states ensured that early care and education programs were paid by enrollment and not attendance long term. Maryland is a leader in the country because MSD's idea to support early care and education programs to be more financially stable through the use of advance payment is truly a model policy, and MSD is the only state to adopt this process. MSD transitioned to this process in January, and with the new technical system deployments complete, providers began receiving payment on February 2nd for their February services ending on February 28th. MSD can confidently say the policy shift is successful and now in place. This policy change includes 2 additional updates that impact providers. First, in keeping with their enrollment-based payments, MSD will no longer reconcile reimbursement based on the attendance of children with receipted scholarship vouchers and will pay for the full month regardless of the number of days the child attends. Second, MSD collapsed the service period from 10 days to once per month. MSD, as per recommendations from the Office of Legislative Audits, conducts an attendance audit on 25% of invoices each service period. Collapsing service periods in half has reduced the audit burden for providers by half immediately. I will note change is hard, and though these updates address longstanding issues with the childcare community, change is not necessarily easier. For that reason, MSD has made sure to continue providing updates and opportunities for engagement around these changes and done so in multiple languages and mediums. MSD will continue to do so following the January rollout. Last year, the General Assembly, based on House Bill 995, which established presumptive eligibility program where an MSDE will, upon completion of a brief abbreviated form, assume a child care scholarship program applicant family is eligible for a voucher and begin reimbursing a provider for that child immediately. The applicant would continue on to submit complete application for full review and final determination. If after that time the applicant is still eligible, no changes would occur. If after that time the applicant is ineligible, MSD will notify the provider and will cease reimbursement. The provider will not, under this program, need to reimburse MSD for payments issued while MSD presume the family eligible. To ensure MSD can meet its statutory deadline to implement presumptive eligibility, MSD will embark on a pilot program this March and April with Baltimore City, the jurisdiction that has the largest group of potentially eligible families. The pilot will allow MSD to identify the funding necessary to sustain the program and continue to offset voucher payments MSD makes for families who turn out to be ineligible rather than chargeback providers. MSD will then expand to open the full presumptive eligibility program statewide on July 1, 2023. With regard to the Child Care Scholarship Program and the program's overall rate structure and funding, MSD leveraged American Rescue Plan funds to increase program accessibility by reducing the eligibility cutoff and increasing the provider reimbursement rate. MSD's increased the income eligibility for families to 75% of the state median income for initial program applications and increased provider reimbursement rates to 70th percentile of market rates. The change in rates began in last quarter of fiscal year 2022. Estimates of the costs associated with permanent maintenance of the new Child Care Scholarship Program eligibility thresholds, reimbursement rates, and co-payment support vary. Currently, MSD pays on average $10 million per pay period, of which there are 2 each month. That would result in approximately $30 million needed above existing appropriation. However, this estimate is incomplete. Additional families are returning to the program, and MSD expects that the state's new presumptive eligibility rules take full effect in July of 23 will further drive participation to the program. The General Assembly required MSD to study the anticipated permanent costs of these policies, and the results of the analysis and recommendations from the Center for Law and Social Policy, or CLASP, are in our written response. In short, CLASP estimates the state would need between $72 million and $136 million in additional annual federal and state funding to offer robust support to the Child Care Scholarship Program for all families now eligible under all the new eligibility and reimbursement rates, but who were previously denied. The low end of this estimate assumes that 50% of eligible children would access the program. The high end assumes that all eligible families, 100%, would access the program. The increased costs are almost entirely associated with increased reimbursement rates, co-payment coverage, and reduced eligibility cutoffs, not presumptive eligibility. CLASP estimates that each family who applies and receives services through presumptive eligibility but is then deemed ineligible would, following the presumptive eligibility period, would cost the state approximately $3,100. CLAS estimates this number to be less than 1,000 families per year and likely far lower. MSD was one of the first states in the country to release federal stabilization grant money to child care providers. Nonetheless, last year, during our early childhood budget hearing, we discussed the challenges with the department's administration of the first round of stabilization grant funding. I'm happy to report that improvements to the program in the January launch led to quick results. After engagement with our child care community, To improve the process, MSD provided 6 live customer support sessions to help walk providers through all aspects of the grant application process. MSD set up multilingual robocalls, used social media, weekly messages, and direct email outreach to encourage participation. Consequently, MSD received more than 6,000 applications for round 2 payments and met its March target date for payment issuance for all awarded applicants. MSD distributed the balance of federal stabilization funding using unclaimed pre-calculated awards this past summer, July and August 2022. MSD leveraged its experience for this program to readily administer the $53.2 million in the Governor Stabilization Program in August and September. MSD opened the application window in August and closed the window at the end of August. MSD had completed 95% of the payments by the second week of September. MSD distributed more than $30 million in payments within 2 weeks of the application window closing. MSD, as with federal programs, provided time to resolve any lingering questions or applications that required additional information, and will complete distributing the balance of funds by the first quarter of this calendar year. In addition to the stabilization funds this year, MSD is administering a new one-time bonus program for eligible child care providers and their employees based on the language passed in House Bill 1100 from the 2022 legislative session. This program established 3 pockets of funding: $10 million for $1,000 individual bonuses for providers and their employees who were working before July 1, 2022, and who have or will by June 30, 2023, complete a credential from the Maryland Child Care Credential Program, $4 million in split $500 and $500 bonuses for providers and employees who started on or after July 1, 2022, and who have or will by June 30, 2023, complete a credential from the Maryland Child Care Credential Program, and $2 million comprised of $500 hiring bonuses for providers who have hired new employees on or after July 1, 2023 to support onboarding, recruitment, and initial salary costs. MSD opened application payments in November and began sending out award letters in January. Final award notices and payments are being sent out this month to all providers who were eligible in the order applications were received, since the program was on a first-come, first-served basis. In addition to the American Rescue Plan funding associated with the Child Care Scholarship Program and the Federal Stabilization Program, MSD also had discretionary resources as state set aside. With those resources, I directed MSD to create a new grant opportunity based on feedback from the early childhood community that targeted 7 research-based high-leverage strategy areas. This program, Maryland Rebuilds, was designed to support the state's child care system in utilizing federal funds to stabilize, strengthen, and sustain the child care system and mitigate the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. Maryland Rebuilds is also designed to kickstart and lay the foundation for blueprint early childhood programs and requirements. We received over 167 applications and awarded more than $25 million to Rebuild's applicants. MSD, as it does with all of its grant programs, applied a rigorous process to the application review. The process was one that balanced the desire to award as much as possible while ensuring grant program quality and awarded dollars are most likely to generate a specific, clear outcome goal. MSD also prioritized issuing grants to applicants who do not traditionally receive or take part in the MSD grant programs to encourage innovation and expanded engagement. MSD issued award notices in December, and MSD will be publicly announcing the awardees and their programs this spring. For example, MSD awarded more than $1 million to Luna Family Support Services for the creation of a family child care incubator and apprenticeship program that is designed to be responsive to the unique language and cultural needs of the Latino community, a population of providers and families that has been severely underserved in most parts of Maryland for decades. Tip Top Tots Early Learning Center, a fun name to say out loud, another awardee, will develop a paid apprenticeship program aimed at recruiting and training individual or groups of individuals to enter the child care workforce with an emphasis on gaining clinical experience that builds representation across diverse communities and working with vulnerable populations. Montgomery College, with its award, will develop a process for formally recognizing and grant credit for prior learning experiences that are equally rigorous as traditional degree and certification pathways. Many of our providers have life experiences under them, and they could walk the walk with any degreed individual, and we do not give credit for that. It is time we do that, and I'm looking forward to making that a standard here in Maryland. Beyond the other Maryland Rebuilds awardees, remaining discretionary American Rescue Plan child care resources are going to expand existing initiatives, including more than $75 million for the Child Care Scholarship Program reimbursement and the expansion of Judy Early Learning Center hubs. For this reason, MSDE respectfully disagrees with the proposed reduction of the $10 million in general fund support for the Child Care Scholarship Program, and in addition of the $10 million in unappropriated supplemental child care development block grant funding. While the department has a small balance of ARP discretionary funds available to offset the program shortfall in fiscal year 24, reducing the program by $10 million in general funds may further exacerbate the issue. The policy changes implemented with the ARP discretionary funds support and sustain child care providers participating in child care scholarship program and provide much needed support to low-wage earners who would not otherwise qualify for this benefit. Again, I appreciate the collaborative relationship with DLS, and I extend our thanks, and once again to Ms. Wagner for her excellent analysis. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your testimony. Are there any questions? Delegate Grice.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a few questions here. I met with the 4 counties that I represent on the Upper Eastern Shore with the superintendents before session started this year. And collectively, they all said that there's no way that they could provide 70% of our 3-year-old pre-K, that they could provide that service for several reasons. One, qualified teachers aren't knocking on anybody's door right now. I mean, it's hard to find teachers. And the second part is the infrastructure that they have now. They certainly can't just go out and build portable classrooms, because in many cases the core facilities are already strained. And then the last part is funding, and I'm certain, that it's good news to them that they're going to go, we have the funding to add 2 steps, for these teacher salaries. So that'll alleviate that third problem. But is it a reasonable expectation that we're going to be looking at our private centers, our private daycare providers, and also Head Start to provide more than 30% of the service to these 3-year-olds?
It's a good question, Delegate. Ultimately, the blueprint sets this vision around a 50-50 mixed delivery system. I think it's an aspirational, bold goal. I don't think we will hit it everywhere. That's why, and the Assembly recognized that. That's why they slipped in the waiver language that the department can grant if you don't hit it. I think what we want to see is partnerships. We want to see whether you go from 10 to 20 to 30 over the next 3 years. We want to see partnerships. We want families to have options. We want all of those options to be great. And when those families transition from pre-K into, say, Greensboro Elementary, we want them to kick butt and we want them to be ready for kindergarten, right? And so at the end of the day, 50-50 is great aspirationally, but not even Montgomery County, I think, will have a tough time to even hit that, and they have more providers. I think you're also talking about 2 entities who have not naturally collaborated for many years. So we got to also incentivize that. And so I think the waiver's there. I think it's reasonable to assume we won't hit 50-50 anytime soon, maybe not even 30% anytime soon, but I don't want to say throw the white flag and say don't collaborate. We got to collaborate.
So how far into the future are we going to continue to give waivers? Because I can tell you that even the daycare providers are telling us they can't do it. There's no way that they're going to go out and get credentialed. There's no way that our centers can get credentialed. And for our public school system, again, even transportation's an issue. I mean, is there any goal as to, at what point in time we're going to stop giving these waivers?
Yeah, I think ultimately the Assembly gives me the right to give waivers, so I will give waivers, and I will not punish a district for not putting in good faith efforts and not hitting the 50%. At the end of the day, we just hope for good faith efforts to ensure collaboration, but if it's in the law, then I will continue to grant waivers where it's right, but I'm not going to penalize them for not hitting that target, especially when they tried hard and there are things out of their control. So
I appreciate that. And I think realistically, probably the groups that are most suited to be able to take on most of these 3-year-olds are going to be our community action agencies who provide Head Start. Now, the federal funding is, I mean, you're in the hundreds of millions of dollars, so obviously we're not going to be able to back, that off. So will there be any funding out of the state budget to help these Head Starts? Because they already have the infrastructure in place in most cases, and they also have the transportation infrastructure in most places, but right now they're not being funded. I know the Judy Centers are, and that's good news, but our community action agencies are not.
So outside of what's currently in the allowance, I mean, that's really all we can speak to, and, what's in the allowance is what's in there. I don't have any idea or estimation of what, future operating budgets could look like, but, certainly heard.
Okay. I do appreciate it. And then I don't know if you guys can stay a little bit longer. We do have a couple of those community action agencies here, and also Kelly Griffiths is going to join that same panel, so she represents 9 school systems on the Eastern Shore as well, and they're going to talk about their challenges. Good. Thank you.
Vice Chair Solomon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to thank my colleague, Delegate Grice, for really digging into this. It's been great to work with him, and I know we've got a lot of challenges on the pre-K implementation. And again, appreciate you all rolling up your sleeves, because I know you weren't here when we wrote the law, and so it's a good partnership, to make sure that we're doing right by implementation of the blueprint. And I also just want to say thank you. Your team has just been really fantastic to work with. From the package of bills that we passed last year on the child care system to the work we're doing on presumptive eligibility to, and I've said this to your staff before as well, I think you really heard from the community the outcry of how the scholarship program was not working, how difficult it was for providers to actually participate in it, and the memo that you put out, in November to change the payment system, I think was just a tremendous acknowledgement that the system wasn't working, and you all had a better system in place, or a plan in place that, again, was really reflective of what the community was saying. And I just wanted to say thank you. We've tackled a lot of the challenges we saw in our system, and we're in the process of fixing them. And again, that's a testament to the leadership of you and your team. So thank you for that. I'm actually just sort of curious at a couple of questions, but on the payment system and the rollout, how has it gone? What do you estimate potentially the new costs for that to be going forward?
Go ahead, Justin. It was his brainchild at the end of the day, and I just said, if you can pull it off, you can pull it off, and we pulled it off. So go ahead.
So truly happy to report that, we had marked in the memo, our goal was to try and get this done by January and transition in January. And we actually pulled, I think yesterday I got an update. I think we had over 600 hours of overtime from the staff in December over the holidays to get this through, but we did. So what we did is we leveraged a check writing system. It's a little in the weeds, Delegate, but we leveraged a check writing system in January to allow us to make the technical deployments. So what we were able to do when we did that is flip the system over with a whole new code base that we needed to run the new calculations, to test them, to go through all of that. And so we actually, the last weekend of January, successfully ran all of the February payments, and providers started receiving payment for February on February 2nd. And then this weekend was our second stress test on the system, because we went ahead and ran the second half of the month. That was successful, and got the update this morning that is now transmitted to accounting for processing this week. So that is actually now fully in place. And because we no longer wait for invoices in order to process those payments, it means that we're effectively paying 100% of providers on time now.
Can you address the cost? Because it's really not a cost.
The cost, yeah. So the cost-wise, we still have, so part of our American Rescue Plan funding, so we had the $309 million for federal stabilization relief. We have $193 million extra in department discretionary resources. About $25 million of that's going towards the Maryland Rebuilds program that the superintendent mentioned. We have another 28.2-ish going towards the true modernization of, it's called CCATS. It's the Child Care Automated Tracking System, very creative name. But that is a system that is essentially being held together with bubblegum stick glue. And so it's about time for the department to do that, because that's essentially the underlying database where the payment architecture works for the child care system. It's actually what we tweaked. We tiptoed through and tweaking to get this deployment out, actually, in the meantime. Well, we will be rolling that over. In addition to that, we budgeted over $70 million of those funds to account for the increased costs associated with advanced payment, the enrollment-based payment. and the increased reimbursement rates and the reduced eligibility cutoffs. Our estimates are showing that as with the changes that we've made this past year to the scholarship program, as Ms. Wagner noted in her analysis, we're back up above pre-pandemic levels, and that's ticking up. And so between that, the soft launch of the family portal, which went live, so families can actually now apply online for their vouchers. They started that already. It's a soft launch, so I'm not going to say too much about it, but it has been working and working well for a brand new digital submission system. So with all of those things, we are anticipating the need to have additional resources associated with that. The one thing I do want to note, I know that we talked about the CLASP study and their anticipated costs associated with permanent adoption of these policies. Their low-end estimate is about 50% participation rate. We're still under a 10% participation rate statewide. And so it will be time before it gets to that cost. And so, I do want to temper that a little bit, but I do think that the estimates we've provided in the written analysis will probably give you a pretty comprehensive idea of those expected costs.
That's really helpful and actually sort of dovetails into the next question that I was going to ask you. So sort of clarifying the discrepancy that's in the analysis that talks about an estimated $96.3 million in the supplemental federal funds for CCDBG. It seems like that's being covered by, you have the $70 million allocated, you've got the 25 for the Maryland rebuild, and then obviously the potential 10 million additional request is presumptive eligibility. I think the best parallel I would draw to it is sort of what we changed with the blueprint, right? We knew those low-income students were there already. We just did a better job of identifying them. So obviously the cost for the blueprint have now gone up, but we're going to be in turn helping 100,000 low-income students who weren't getting that support before. And what we're doing with the presumptive eligibility and the changes to enrollment is saying we know these students exist. We know these families have been, denied for paperwork issues. We're going to make that a whole lot easier so those families can actually get it. And that 10 million in my mind is potentially for cost overages that we haven't, we really can't estimate yet, because starting July 1, we'll have a whole new system of getting those families in the door. So is that kind of a correct approximation, so that 96 million is really earmarked, so to speak?
Yes, sir. And to add to that too, the second concern of that is, the federal grants are always, it's a matching piece, right? And so we always want to be mindful of any sort of reduction to the state's contribution and the potential impact, the double impact that could have on federal match by reducing state match contributions.
Okay.
And when you find better ways to identify poverty, you pull it off. I mean, this year we did Medicaid direct certification, and the comp ed numbers shot up like crazy, and so, which is a good thing. And so, I mean, presumptive eligibility is going to do that as well too. So, because when you reduce the time tax and the burden of paperwork and bureaucracy, people are able to actually access services better, and so. We're going to see a big spike in Maryland's population, the concentrated poverty, and that's still growing, as whether we like it or not, because we haven't solved other issues. So we got to make sure we service these families properly. So. Yeah.
And in the long run, we know that's going to save us lots and lots and lots of money. It may not show up on the balance sheet tomorrow, but
absolutely.
And then the last question I had is more of a very minor one, more technical. So I was really excited to see the change in the PINs from the contractual positions to full-time PINs, and I think that again will really go a long way to address the concerns that I'm hearing on the ground from providers. Just one question: I noticed that there's only one PIN budgeted for the Excels program, and obviously, with the blueprint rollout, we want more providers getting into Excels. Can you comment on whether there's hopefully we're going to be expanding the staff there, or if it's just going to be covered maybe by another part of the agency?
It's because the rest of it is contractual. So I asked Justin, what can I ask for DBM? He said, you can't ask for all of the conversions. So the rest of them are contractual. If I could snap my finger and turn the Excels department into all permanent PINs, I would. That's permanent work. But the philosophy was in the past administration, the past few years, is here's a contractual. We got our blueprint pins and it's contractual as well. Yeah. So they're there. It's not just one pin, it's one permanent pin. Okay. But a bunch of them are just contractual.
Okay. Yeah, unfortunately that's repeated across state government. So we're working on that. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Any other questions for the agency? Seeing none, thank you for your time, gentlemen.
Delegate Grice, I'm not staying because I don't want to stay. It's because I got to go to Senator King.
So first I want to just call up, is Laura Wildryer here with the Maryland Family Network? Great. Welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you, Madam Chair and committee members, for the opportunity to testify today. I'm Laura Wheeldryer, Executive Director of Maryland Family Network. Every year, we carefully monitor the state's investment in young children and their families, which of course includes the budget of Maryland State Department's Division of Early Childhood. The proposed FY24 budget reflects your leadership and many proud achievements for the state in the form of critical investments such as the landmark Blueprint for Maryland's Future. Thank you to the Department of Legislative Services for their thorough and incisive budget analysis. We support and urge this committee's support for the proposed FY24 budget. However, most urgently and significantly, we must reject the DLS recommendation to cut $10 million from the Child Care Scholarship Program allocation. Child Care Scholarship is our single biggest investment in child care and critical to sustaining progress for the state. A few items of rationale for protecting this money. As noted by DLS, enrollment is on the upswing, even as the field recovers slowly from the effects of the pandemic. As a state, we have not yet absorbed the impact of recent enhancements to Child Care Scholarship, including major changes that we just talked about, like the addition of presumptive eligibility as enacted by the General Assembly, increased provider reimbursement rates, and increased family eligibility rates. I cannot stress enough the excitement I have as an advocate in hearing MSD talk about some of the policies they have chosen to enact recently that really positions Maryland as a national leader. And as I respectfully submit, this is precisely the wrong moment for disinvestment in Child Care Scholarship. So thank you for the opportunity to testify in support of the FY24 budget.
Thank you so much for your testimony. Any questions? Seeing none, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And I'll call the remaining oral witnesses to come up as a group if that's possible. Is there a lowest suggestion? No. Is there a Corey Bowen? Yes. Please come up, sir. Chris Benzing. Kelly Griffith. That's all I have for oral testimony. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Corey Bowen. I'm Director of Head Start, Early Head Start for Shorp Incorporated. We are a CAP agency located in Salisbury, Maryland, but one of our primary projects is Head Start. We have been discussing off and on the misalignment of the blueprint with Head Start. We understand that based on the blueprint rollout, the ideology is to serve as many children, all children in the pre-K situation. But unfortunately, as we've learned, there are several counties that may have issues putting this in place because of the infrastructure, facilities, and being able to serve children. So from a standpoint of a program, we also targeted that same age groups. When pre-K expansion was first rolled out and talking with former liaison Stephen Hicks, the understanding was that MSDE would be looking to enroll all 4-year-old children into pre-K and ultimately begin working on 3-year-old children. So from a Head Start standpoint, what that said to us was the need for you will not be as great. So we began to reduce numbers to survive because as a Head Start program, we're federally funded. Therefore, if I tell the feds that I'm going to have, I'll use small numbers, 100 children, the expectation I'm going to have 97 of those 100 children, or else I find myself in a bad situation in terms of the regulations. So as to not compete, we converted our Head Start numbers from 761 to 170, trying to make way for pre-K to come on board. It is now our understanding that with the blueprint, help is needed to do that, but there are some misalignments for us that make it difficult. One of those being the eligibility situation. As you heard, pre-K expansion eligibility is at 300%. For us at Head Start, it's 100, well, up to 130. So that's a big difference in terms of that. And when you look at Maryland specifically, minimum wage being what it is now will outsource, will outplace families in that situation. So right now for a family of 3, the 100% poverty is $24,860. And minimum wage at $15, which is projected to go to, that's $31,200, which will outsource those families. I didn't intend to speak on this, but putting a plug in for that reduction for child care scholarships. So those families that don't qualify for Head Start, they have to go somewhere, need help finding somewhere. So that money would be significant to help those families maintain child care throughout the program. The other situation we find ourselves in, as you've heard before too, is the national teaching shortage. The staffing situation for us is very bleak as well. In my program alone, I had about 38 vacancies, which constitutes about 20% of my staff, give or take. But the situation is, as they said, people with credentials are not coming to the door, so we're finding ourselves having to literally recruit anywhere we can to get staff to come into our doors. The situation being also having to get the credentials required, the CDA, and once more often than not, sad to say, when they do receive the CDA, the public school offer is a bit more enticing because we can't match the salaries for them. So again, we're finding ourselves struggling. So ultimately, I am in favor of pre-K expansion. I support that because what that does for universal pre-K is that all children that need services can go to school, regardless of income. Also, children with disabilities that need help can get those services because, again, we cannot provide that. And even in our partnerships prior to the Blueprint pre-K expansion coming on, providers would come to our facilities to provide services, but we were told in some situations they don't have the manpower to do that. So therefore, we would unselfishly let the children go to the public school to get the help they need. I've often told the public schools, help me help you. While we may have the children given that Head Start for a couple of years, maybe 3, depending on when they start with us, ultimately they're coming to you, to your school self for K through 12. So it's important, it's imperative that we begin to work together much sooner to help those children succeed. And also, as we talked about the KRA data, the impotence of trying to demonstrate kindergarten readiness. But again, we're faced with challenges that we have in terms of trying to make that work curriculum-wise, et cetera. But it is our goal to see what, from a Head Start standpoint, as I speak for my CAP agency, what it is that we can do to support this Blueprint implementation. But we have to figure out how to bridge those gaps because we find ourselves a situation of, from a county perspective, if your pre-K expansion is 300, mine's 130, it's in our best interest to have those conversations, what children fit where. Because if you place those children that are in my income bracket in your centers, I can't help you. So we need to be able to have those conversations to discuss what that looks like. The other piece is, across the 7 counties that we serve, it will look different in each situation because what one school may have or what one LEA may have, the others may not. So we're trying to have those conversations. We're trying to put those issues on the table. We're trying to figure out what we can do to support this initiative going forward so that all children at the end of the day will be served because that's what our mission is, to help children and families across the board.
Thank you so much, Mr. Berlin.
I'm Kelly Griffith. I am a retired superintendent in Maryland. I served 39 years, and I'm the executive director of the Eastern Shore of Maryland Superintendents Group. And I'm going to share just a couple data points, and then I'm going to share some concerns of the Eastern Shore superintendents. I'm going to focus on Pillar 1 and the budget. And again, all the superintendents know intervening early is what's going to make the difference. So please understand that we're totally in support of this early intervention. First of all, a data point that Corey and I are good friends and we work very well together, have for years. One of the data points we talk about is teacher vacancies, and I think it's really important to go on record and talk about what that looks like on the Eastern Shore. We have 99 teacher openings currently on the Eastern Shore as of January 1. And we have about 300 teachers on the Eastern Shore that have a conditional or provisional certification. We have 165 support staff vacancies. So the vacancies is a big concern that we have on the shore. And the other data point that I think is really important, we do not have a certification site on the Eastern Shore. So I'm working diligently with Chesapeake College, the Higher Ed Center, to try to make it a certification site. But certification is a real, I would say, real challenge on the shore. We do, all of 9 counties do grow our own programs where we're really trying to get our instructional assistants to become teachers. And we're working on that. But we need to also grow your own program to become instructional assistants. So that is a data point. The other data point that I think is really important for you all to note is that there are a couple districts on the Eastern Shore that have universal pre-K already. And that is Kent, Somerset, and Talbot offer universal pre-K right now, all 4-year-olds. But the other jurisdictions do not, and a lot of that has to do with space. and it has to do with the restrictions in buildings. So we might need, we will need time in retrofitting or making some changes. As you all know, building a school or adding a classroom onto a building takes a lot of time. So what we are looking for in that arena is more a slower progression of the timeline. I was glad to hear about the waivers earlier today when it came to some of the waivers. But again, I don't always want to be living, our districts to be living on a waiver. So I think the time to be able to get those facilities where they need to be, which also means support in the CIPs, the capital improvement plans, very important. Another data point, currently on the Eastern Shore, there are 10 memorandums of understanding that have been attained on the Eastern Shore with MSDE through the blueprint, and that is with private child care centers. Only 10, and some districts have none. So for an example, Worcester has 4, but there are other districts that have none. So a lot of that has to do with rural settings. And in rural settings, there are a lot of home daycares. So we do struggle with trying to, I don't know how we're going to get to the 50%, Delegate Geist. We're struggling getting to the 30%. But we do need to see some more time in the legislation. And we also need to see funding. It costs money for people to become certified. And so time and money. So those are some data points that I think are really important. The other point that I wanted to make today is that pre-K, if we focused on pre-K first and really focused the school systems and making sure they're doing the universal pre-K, getting the pre-K, and we really have those conversations with our community partners and the 3-year-olds, I think we're off to a good start. Actually, we had that conversation the other day, that we're off to a good start, having these conversations and getting this rolling. It's going to take time, and we just need some of the time, the funding, and the assistance of a flexibility with certification. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Chris Benzing. I'm the Executive Director of Maryland Rural Development Corporation. We are the community action agency for the Upper Shore, the Upper Eastern Shore of Maryland. I'm here today because we do run a Head Start program. Like my colleague said, we didn't come here to testify to say, don't cut the child care scholarship, but don't cut the child care scholarship. We have a program in Cecil County that deals with birth to 3-year-olds. That is a huge part of our funding. That actually becomes a feeder program into our Head Starts, into the pre-K 3 system that the blueprint's looking to bring about. So it's very important that not be cut. As far as 30% not being possible, I'm going to disagree with that to a certain extent. We have 403 spaces right now in our Head Start system in 3 counties. Given the size of the counties, that's a lot. If we were able to partner at this point, that would take care of almost half of the 30% number in those 3 counties. We would be done. We're not allowed to partner because they put a minimum of our teachers have to make $60,000 a year. Our federal funding, which comes from the Office of Head Start, has allowed me recently to increase our teacher level to $19 an hour. That's $40,000 a year. It's only 2/3 of the way to that level. The additional funding that's needed to get there, and this isn't even including getting our center certified or is astronomical. But I think it's in there somewhere, because I heard numbers being thrown around today, 144 million, 10 million, blah. I'm looking at $1.5 million to do it. And that would allow us to partner right now to take care of that number. 30% wouldn't be a dream. 30% wouldn't be something like, well, one day we'll get, no, we're there. 50% we'd have to work on. As far as capital, as far as places, we have those centers now, as Delegate Wright spoke of. We have the transportation systems now. The other issue becomes, at that age, you are not allowed to be on a bus more than an hour. In rural Maryland, and especially on the Eastern Shore, we stretch that to we're clocking 57 minutes sometimes, because to get from Ridgely, making all those stops all the way down to Fredericksburg, it's going to take you an hour. We have the systems to do it. We're looking for a way to come into play. To that end, we have met with the Eastern Shore delegation. The three of us have met as well. But we're also trying to set up meetings with our federal partners. We're trying to set up meetings to see what can get waived. This is 168 pages of what I can't do. I need like 40 of them taken out. And then we'll be able to come to the table and say, this is what Head Start can offer. Okay? We offer, in Cecil County, we do early Head Start. I know Corey does early Head Start as well. We all partner with Maryland Family Network. We're offering the structure to get pregnant women in our programs until we hand them off to kindergarten. That is far more important than these 40 pages, I guarantee you. And that's what we're looking for. That's what I'm here to say today. It is possible. It is something we can do. We need funding from MSDE. We need funding to get our teachers certified. As an example, to get certification, one of the groups that we work with, they're like, well, we need to have certification in other majors other than education. This book says there are 3 majors that can work as teachers in our program. You know that's crazy. I know that's crazy. My wife's a special educator in Baltimore City. Her bachelor's was in recreation education. She worked at Burley Elementary in your district. She couldn't work at Head Start. My deputy director, Abby McNinch, has a PhD in early childhood education. She can't be a teacher. We need those relaxed in order to get, we need those relaxed federally in order to increase how we can certify teachers and bring them in. But we also need the funding to make it happen. So can we make 30%? Not the way it's set up now. If you put me in charge, we can make it. So we can do it. It is possible to do it. The infrastructure's there, the people's there, the desire's there, the families are there. They talked about finding families. We found them. We have waiting lists of those families.
Yes.
We found them. I'll leave it at that.
That's why we leave them for last.
Yeah, I tend to get loud and obnoxious. I apologize.
No. I mean, this is an important issue. It's something to be passionate about. You have dedicated much of your adult life to supporting children and families, and we are personally thankful for that. And I can speak for both myself and Vice Chair Solomon. We have children in early childhood. I have a pre-K student as well, so we're living the walk that you've been on many times. We're just beginning that walk. So just thank you for your commitment. Are there any questions for this panel? I just want you to know that we're here to problem solve with you, and definitely appreciative of our colleague, Delegate Grice, just being a champion for this issue. We got to get it right. We didn't do all this not to get it right, so I hope that we can continue to work together.
Thank you so much for your time and your support.
Of course.
Really appreciate it.
We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here. And that concludes all of our testimony for today's hearing, and the hearing comes to a close. Thank you.